Hello and welcome to this Ecolab Pest Elimination webinar. My name is Amy Rayburn and I work in Ecolab's Global Pest Elimination team. I'd like to introduce my colleague Douglas Gardner, a corporate scientist in Ecolab's Pest Elimination division. Douglas has spent over 25 years researching and working in the field of insect science. He has an MSc in insect science and is a board-certified entomologist and registered sanitarian with the National Environmental Health Association in the USA. Douglas, over to you.
Thank you, Amy. It's a pleasure to be here today to discuss two topics with you. The first will be a few points around COVID-19 situation that we're in. Then we'll move to our main topic today, large flies. Let's take a minute and talk about pest services during this difficult time. The COVID-19 pandemic has impacted all of our lives, our families, our businesses, and there's a few important things to keep in mind related to pest services as we move through and beyond this time. First, we'd like to point out that it was recently announced that pest services are considered an essential industry. So we play a vital role in maintaining safe and healthy environments. Even in reduced production and closed environments like we're currently in, pest services keep unwanted guests at bay, making it easier to reopen and scale up when that time arrives. Ecolab Pest Elimination will continue to deliver the products and services our customers need during these challenging times.
This is a question that's being asked a lot right now, Douglas. We know that pests pose health and hygiene risks, but do we know if they can transmit COVID-19?
Well, first, thank you, Amy, for including this question in the presentation today. It's an important one. Before I answer, let's review how COVID-19 is transmitted according to the CDC. The primary mode of transmission for COVID-19 is between people who are in close contact with one another, that's within 6 feet, through respiratory droplets produced when an infected person coughs or sneezes. It also may be possible that a person can get COVID-19 by touching a surface or object that has the virus on it, and then touching their own mouth, nose, or possibly their eyes, but this is not thought to be the main way this virus is spread. Now, concerning pests, while there may be scenarios where a pest might mechanically transfer virus from one surface to another, this is a highly unlikely avenue for disease transmission, so the answer is functionally no. This, of course, does not diminish the negative impact pests have on food safety and health. All right, let's turn for a moment and talk about mitigating pest risks during COVID-19 closures. Of course, pests don't take a vacation during downtimes. You should look for pest activity whenever you're checking on closed facilities. Some of the most obvious pest activity signs to look for include rodent droppings or rodent damaged stock, live pests such as cockroaches or large flies, and dead or live crawling pests on the floor. If any signs of pests are found, your pest service provider should be called. This includes during closures. So how you shut down a facility can play a big role in the amount of pest risks you experience. There's important tasks you can do as seen on this slide, but there are things your service provider can also do to help. This may include increasing monitoring on the interior for pest activity and increasing protection on the exterior to reduce pest pressure on the facility. So I would ask you to work closely with your pest service provider to make sure you're protected during closures and to help get you quickly back up and running when the time comes to reopen. When you do reopen your facility, there are a few things to keep in mind related to pests. Depending on how the facility was shut down, there may be some additional tasks that need to be done to make sure the facility is pest-free moving forward. As you can see, the reopening task is similar to the closure list. There's one more additional important task. When it's time to reopen your facility, it's also an important time to call your pest service provider to ask for a reopening service. They can do a thorough inspection to make sure that you get off to the right foot as you resume operations, and that would include making pest-related structural and sanitation recommendations, identifying pest activity and conditions that might invite pests, and eliminating pests to get you started with a pest-free environment.
And as a pest service provider, Ecolab is keeping safety as our priority. This is the case across all our global locations where we're following local and national requirements, limiting travel, increasing hand hygiene and sanitization provisions and cleaning protocols, and also ensuring that our associates understand their responsibilities regarding their own health. These measures mean that we will continue to protect our associates, customers, and the communities where we operate. You can find lots more information on this topic and how Ecolab is supporting customers on ecolab.com. So we're heading into fly season in many global regions, and we know that large flies pose more problems than just being an annoying nuisance. So Douglas, to start us off, what exactly is a large fly?
Let's start by defining what we mean when we say large flies. There's a lot of fly species out there, but there are a few notorious pests that breed in nasty places and specialize in hanging around humans and human food. We call these large flies to differentiate them from another group of nasty flies that are much smaller in size and live in drains and filthy cracks and crevices in food areas. We call those flies small flies, of course, and that includes moth flies, phorid flies, and vinegar flies or fruit flies. We'll talk about small flies in a future webinar. So large flies. These three photos represent the most common large fly species focused on in a large fly program. This includes the housefly, Musca domestica, blowfly or bottle flies, that's the metallic shiny one in the middle. Those belong to the family called Caliphoridae, and flesh flies from the family Sarcophagidae. All three of these species are attracted to decaying organic matter like rotting meat, food that's decaying, feces, or other types of filth. Because they breed and hang around in filth, they're also referred to as filth flies. At some point in their short lives, these flies have lived in, landed on, or otherwise spent time in contact with disgusting materials. This association with filth results in these pests bringing risks with their presence.
Flies can have a negative impact on reputation, with a poor customer experience resulting in damaging reviews. Health departments also penalize for fly activity and can even enforce a shutdown until a problem has been resolved. And at Ecolab, while we've always been very sensitive to fly activity and the problems it can cause, over the last few years, we have seen a growing intolerance from our customers who are less likely to ignore flies and are more prone to proactively call us in to get on top of fly activity to stop it becoming a problem. And you can see here the increase in calls that we've had over the last couple of years, and this really underlines the growing customer sensitivity that we are dealing with rather than an increase in the actual flies. So there's a growing understanding of the impact of flies on reputation and a business's bottom line. They can cost you customers. They're also a major risk to food safety, and Douglas is going to explain why.
Thank you, Amy. One of the major dangers large flies pose is the mechanical transmission of pathogens through their activities. They can contaminate food just by landing on it. Of course, these pests do much more than just sit on a surface, don't they? Large fly activity combined with lapses in time and temperature can contribute to the spread of disease. They're known to carry more than 200 pathogens, including Salmonella and E. coli. Their sponging mouthparts, hairy bodies, sticky feet, and feeding behavior can contaminate food and food handling surfaces. Let's take a quick tour of the fly's body and see how their structures are related to disease transmission. We'll start with their dirty little mouths. Large flies have very active mouths. Here's a fly pushing a liquid droplet out of its mouth. This behavior can actually help the fly's internal temperature control and water balance. But this behavior can also push gut microorganisms to the external portions of the mouth parts. So that mouth is also covered with sensory structures. When they land on something that might be tasty, like this delicious looking macaroon, their first taste comes through their feet. Sensors on their feet will stimulate the extension of their mouth parts, or proboscis, where they can then probe the surface carefully. By the way, fly mouthparts don't do well with solid foods, so they push saliva and gut liquids containing enzymes out their proboscis to liquefy materials on the surface they're exploring. Isn't that nice? Let's take a closer look at mouthparts. This is a scanning electron micrograph of a housefly head. We can see one of the large compound eyes on the left of the screen. The antennae are tucked into grooves at the top of the image, and the proboscis is actually folded into the base of the head capsule, so you can't see the full length of it. But we can see the spongy pad called the labellum folded in half. It's inside that blue box there. If we unfold the labellum, we can see the grooves and channels that guide food particles and liquids to a central collection area and ultimately into the fly. We can even take a closer look at these grooves to see the finer structures. So this is an image of the edge of the labellum. It's a 2,000 times magnification of that edge. And here we get a closer look at the grooves called pseudotrachea. We're even able to see the bacteria on the surfaces. If you look inside that blue box, you can see those rod-shaped bacteria in there. Another image, even a little closer, shows the bacteria plainly. This is actually E. coli 0157H7. It should be pretty clear here that these little mouths can be quite dirty, especially combined with the fly's behavior of probing around with this sponge on almost every surface it lands on. So it has a dirty mouth. It also has a dirty backside. We'll not spend much time on that, other than to point out that, in fact, in this image, its rear end is resting on that bread. There are great opportunities to transfer pathogens from that end too. All right, let's take a closer look at the feet. Again, we'll turn to a scanning electron micrograph. This is the tarsus, or foot, of a housefly. There are two tarsal claws at the end with two pads in between those claws. The pads are called pulvilli. Each pulvillus is covered with tiny hairs that greatly increase the surface area of these pads. That's what allows the fly to walk vertically on surfaces like glass. These pads are also great areas for pathogens to get picked up to later be transferred to other surfaces. Look at the setae or hair on the rest of that foot. These animals are covered with setae. It's like they're made to pick up filth, all wrapped in fur, like tiny flying dust mop that's wet on both ends. All right, do you get the point at how nasty these things are? Let's explore a few important behaviors that these pests have. First, large flies are a seasonal pest. Because they're outdoors, they're dependent on exterior temperatures. This is why we see most activity during the warmer months of the year. Just a note on this, if you see large flies inside during the winter months, interior breeding may be taking place, and it's time to go on a search for interior filth capable of supporting maggots. Large flies are a short-lived animal. So how do they end up in your facility? A quick look at their lives answers this question. In general, as we've said, they live outside and breed outside. Once they're adults, they're very mobile, and they go in search for love and good places to raise the next generation. They come near our structures because we place things there that they find attractive. They love both good smells and bad smells to our noses. Once in the area, they will actively fly through open doors and windows. And this is not a passive activity. They respond to human openings. So they can't tell the difference between a barn and a high-end restaurant. If it smells interesting in the area, they'll fly inside to take a look around. Once inside, they go about their normal activities, looking for love, food, water, breeding materials. After a while, or if something's missing, they'll try to find their way back outside, but they're not very good at doing that. So most of them are stuck inside until they die. If we think about this entire process, we can identify the best place to try and stop interior large fly activity. So the best long-term solutions occur outside, of course, before they ever get inside. Getting rid of flies once they're inside is critical, but the real magic happens outside, especially near our doors. Let's turn our attention to odors and large fly behavior. Large flies have a very keen sense of smell, and they'll fly great distances in response to odors. And it's not just filth that they're attracted to, they also respond to food smells, things that we find attractive. All right, so at Ecolab, we took some common food items from a quick serve restaurant and exposed them to foraging flies to try to answer the question, so what food smells in a restaurant are the most attractive to flies? In this study, we included French fries. We took the hamburger, we deconstructed it. So in other words, the meat, buns, the lettuce, the condiments, we had separate. We also included a shake. I believe it was a chocolate shake, apple pie, chicken nuggets. We put carbonated soda there too. All right, so we put these all in the presence of flies, and we watched what the flies did. So my question to you is, which of these foods do you think is the most attractive? Now, I'll tell you, there was a hands-down winner. Almost all the flies went to one of these things. Which one? Drum roll. And the answer is the ground beef hamburger patty was the hands-down winner. Something that smells good to many of us is also a strong attractant for flies. We should keep this in mind when we think about smells by doorways. Okay, some of the other smells that large flies will respond to include fresh baked bread, fresh corn, like you would find in a display at a grocery store. That's highly attractive. In fact, many agricultural products are strong attractants, especially as they begin to decay, including grains, fruits, vegetables. In fact, fresh cut grass, hay, or other piles, especially if it's decaying vegetation, are highly attractive. All right, milk is a little bit attractive, but once it's sour, it's highly attractive. Fish is highly attractive. Animal-related material is highly attractive, especially dead animals and blood. And it doesn't take much to get the attention of these flies. Even a dead earthworm can attract flies. And if you think about it, you may have even seen this. Feces are also a very strong attractant. Studies have been done that show horse manure is the #1 feces attractant for houseflies. Do you know what human feces was? #2. Amy, see what I did there?
I did.
Thank you. Okay, so that's a pretty good list of attractants. I'm sure there's something in that list that may potentially be present around your facilities. All right, well, let's turn our attention to prevention and talk first about things you can do to help reduce fly activity inside your facility, and then we'll talk a little bit about what your pest service provider can do to help. So we're going to do this taking an outside-in approach, and we'll start on the exterior. On the exterior, it's all about making sure there are, first, no fly breeding sources, and second, reducing fly attractants. Okay, no fly breeding sources. There should not be any maggot on your property. Raw garbage should not be thrown into the dumpster. This will compact at the bottom and provide breeding material. By the way, it takes about a week for a fly to go from an egg to an adult. So any of these things that are present for a week or more will cause problems and you'll have maggots on site. Liners or garbage bags should be tied off so there's no spillage of garbage outside or inside dumpsters. Garbage bins and receptacles should be covered and kept closed. By the way, if maggots are found, it is really a sanitation issue and usually not a time for pesticides. Remove the filth, hose down the area, and then look for a way to make sure that that doesn't happen again. Animal droppings and piles of grass clippings have no place on property. All right, that's breeding sources. Let's talk about reducing attractants. Move garbage containers away from doors whenever possible. Okay, we listed a number of odors to watch out for. Reducing these odors, especially near doors, is important. It is so important to realize that if attractants are near an open door, flies will actively fly into that door, even though the attractants are outside. They'll still actively explore and go right through that opening. One thing that male flies do in their quest to find female flies is to rest on a perch point with a good field of vision where other flies will pass. They do this both inside and outside our doorways. You may have even seen them doing this, darting and chasing anything flying by, jostling with one another for the best landing spots. Okay, maybe that's just an entomologist talking about watching those type of behaviors. But next time you're standing by the dumpster on a warm, sunny morning, take a moment and watch that behavior. All right, second, we're going to talk about closing your facilities to flies. A basic approach is to just look at door use. Can anything be done to reduce the amount of time that these doors are open? Which doors are the biggest contributors to the large fly access should also be evaluated. And if the doors can't be closed, consider placing plastic strips or air doors, air curtains on those doors. So let's talk for just a moment about air pressure. It's often thought that positive air pressure on the inside of structures will help keep flies out. You know, that may sound good, but the reality is to keep flies out, the pressure at the door would need to be so strong it'd feel like a hurricane of wind rushing out. It'd have to be similar to what an air door fan in velocity is to stop flies from getting inside. So again, they don't just float in, they actively fly in. In fact, positive air pressure at doors can cause attractant odors to be pushed out and may actually increase the fly activity at the door. Okay, having said that, in general, positive air pressure on the interior, so that's air moving out of doors, is a best practice. It keeps dust from coming inside. It helps maintain interior temperatures. So air pressure is actually less about flies and more about environmental factors. The main point here is just to keep the door closed. Finally, let's talk about flies once they've gained access to the interior. Once a fly gets inside, it has free access to the entire airspace. It can explore at its leisure and find food, water, and good landing sites to watch for other flies. A fly inside means we have failed at the other two main tasks that are shown on this slide. So I once provided service for a restaurant that had a fairly severe German cockroach problem. And there's a point to this, even though it's not about flies. I conducted an initial inspection during business hours and had a chance to see their operations. I quickly became aware that they had an employee standing at the counter between the kitchen and the main wait station inspecting plates. It was obvious that this person's job was to flick cockroaches off the plates to make sure the guest experience was a good one. That may well have been a critical job for that individual, but they were missing the point. That's applying resources too late in the game. In actuality, they needed to eliminate the cockroach population from inside their facility. So if you find yourself trying to kill hundreds of flies inside, you may be missing the point. In some situations, you may have no other choice, but someone should go look for root causes, find fixes early in this process. In other words, go outside. That's where the game is played. Those are some of the things you can do to reduce fly activity. Let's talk about your pest service provider for just a moment. First, choosing the right pest service provider is also an important part of a successful large fly program. They should have proper credentials. They should provide consistent protocols that actually work. They should provide relevant inspections and timely recommendations. They should focus on root causes and certainly take an outside-in approach. So let's talk about what your pest service provider can do to help. Starting on the outside to reduce fly pressure. They can make recommendations for relevant sanitation and structural improvements. They can make targeted applications of pesticides to fly landing sites, making sure pesticide labels are being followed and local regulations are being complied to. Now, this may be more difficult than it sounds. With new laws protecting pollinators and the environment, with new products introduced on the market regularly, with the many different active ingredients and formulations of pesticides that are out there, there's a real need for a scientific approach to treatments. This is, again, why it's important to select a good pest service provider. There's also equipment that can help reduce large fly pressure on the outside. This includes fly traps, bait stations. There's attract kill devices like the Ecolab Stealth Fly Station. These stations use an attractant fly packet associated with a treated panel to reduce fly activity in high activity areas such as dumpster corrals. This actually reduces the amount of pesticide needed in order to control flies in that area. So instead of having to spray the whole dumpster or the side of the building, it's reduced just to a small panel, and then you bring the flies to that panel. Let me take just a moment here and talk about large-scale fly pressure in an area. Sometimes you may have a facility that's located in an area with tremendous overall fly pressure. Rather than flies visiting your garbage, there's just a huge number of flies in the general area from, let's say, in agricultural settings, dairy or beef production facilities, nearby farms or garbage dumps, etc. In these situations, it's necessary to work closely with your pest service provider to look for solutions, and those solutions may actually be off the property. There may be some serious creativity required if the root cause cannot be addressed. Let me share one more story with you. I was once called to help with a serious fly issue at a brand new resort in Mexico. They were operational, and they were looking forward to the grand opening in a week's time. An inspection was conducted during lunch, which we heard was one of the worst times, and in fact it was. There was this beautiful buffet set up with gorgeous fresh foods and a table full of hot entrees. The flies were so bad that you could not open your mouth in the area. Flies were on everything. We learned that they had been spraying the entire area daily with harsh insecticides. They were actually burning incense during the meal on every single table. It was supposed to be repellent to flies. It wasn't working very well. So we met with the management. We were told that they did not want to see flies at the opening. We don't want to see any flies. They said government representatives, dignitaries, even movie stars were all going to be present on that day. So they wanted us to fix it. All right. So what would you do about this? Maybe don't serve food outside. Recommend they move everything indoors. How about place huge horizontal fans blasting the service area and tell them that the hair-swept look will be good for pictures. All right, so we did explore some creative solutions with them, but the real answer was to get in a vehicle, drive about a mile up the road, upwind, and there was a huge sanitary landfill there. It was owned by the state. That landfill was producing fly tonnage that was being pumped into the Mexican sky on a daily basis. So the solution was to work with them and see if we could get that reduced. In the end, they were able to open, just to finish out this story, they were able to open. We didn't get rid of all the flies, but we got it reduced down enough so that it wasn't a distraction in that grand opening, and they were grateful for those efforts. And again, the point here is that sometimes when there's large pressure overall, you maybe have to go off-site and look for solutions away from there. Otherwise, it becomes very difficult to get rid of flies. All right, excluding large flies from getting inside. Your service provider can, again, help with recommendations here. They can help identify entryways that are the biggest contributors to the problem. They can help explore other options like air doors or plastic strips. In severe situations, creativity will again be necessary, including possibly reducing the size of the openings, finding ways to reduce door open time, maybe even building additional doors on there so there's a vestibule so that flies have 2 layers of barrier, and other modifications. Finally, quickly removing flies once they have gotten inside. Your pest service provider can provide and maintain equipment such as insect light traps. By the way, not all fly lights are the same. Each one comes with a great story, but functionality varies greatly. Make sure you have a pest service provider that you trust when making the decisions of the equipment that you use inside. And keep in mind that catching a lot of flies on the interior does not mean the program is working. It means the large fly program should probably be reevaluated. Even the very best insect light traps should stay close to empty because the fly pressure was minimized on the outside and good barriers are in place to stop flies from ever getting inside. In some situations, your pest service provider can make targeted applications of pesticides on the interior to key landing sites to quickly remove flies that have gotten inside. We've talked about the risks large flies bring. We've talked about how filthy they are and the behaviors that actively bring them into our facilities. And we've talked about how to be smart in solving this pest issue, both what you can do to help and what your pest service provider can do. All right, so this world is a dangerous place. There's many things that seem to be out of our control. But pest issues like large flies does not have to be one of these things. I hope this presentation has had value to you. Thank you for listening, and Amy, I'll turn it over for you for direction at this point.
Thank you, Douglas. I think you added in a few extra disgusting facts for us today. So yeah, enjoyed hearing all about those. So we've had a few questions come in for you, Douglas. Let's start off with this one, which is a question about whether you would treat small flies in the same way as you would treat large flies.
Good question. So small flies, sometimes those are called filth flies too, because they'll breed in disgusting materials, usually biofilm or other drain-related type of materials that are found inside. But the treatment for them is, the theory behind it is similar: get rid of breeding sites, but it's different. Because the breeding sites are different for the small flies, they're usually found inside drains or other areas where you have a buildup of material. The treatment for those, often the most effective way to treat those is to get rid of the actual breeding material. So a search and destroy mission on the inside to reduce that works better with those flies. So the way the fly is built, mouth parts, the little legs that have ovilli and all the same things, that actually is the same between small flies and large flies. So they also have been shown to be able to transfer diseases. However, to get after those, you have to specifically look for their breeding sites inside.
Thank you. So another question that has come in is about which areas would you recommend treating on the exterior?
On the exterior treating, it really comes down to where these flies are landing. So you want to do targeted treatments. Slinging pesticide all over on the outside is not a good practice. It takes some thought and to try to find specific areas where the flies are landing. So that requires a good inspection, specifically at times when the flies are most active, to determine where those treatment locations are. Another option is what I talked about, using a device that actually brings them to the device. This is the Ecolab Stealth Fly Station, so that can be placed in an area where flies are found in general, such as a dumpster corral, and the flies will be attracted to it and land on a much smaller area, so the treatment area is much tighter. So the overall answer is to find places where they land, and then you can do some things to augment that to try to get them on specific small areas to be treated.
So Douglas, you spoke a bit about negative air pressure, positive air pressure, and curtains. There's been a question come in kind of related to that, about whether warm air outlets or vents at entrances can they attract, or do they tend to repel flies?
There has been some work looking at temperatures and attracting of flies, and there's no doubt that flies are attracted somewhat to temperatures. However, it's small in relation to the other factors that make them go through openings. One would be odors near that opening, and two, the opening itself attracting flies to actively fly through it. So the answer is kind of a qualified yes, that can have an impact, but the reality is the other things are much more important. And if you address those other things, you'll have a reduction in fly activity on the inside. So that's a good question.
Great. So we've got two more questions. Both are related to pesticides. So the first one is, can pests become immune to pesticides?
We're talking about resistance here. And yes, pests can do that. And in fact, flies, there's been a history of a lot of, over the years, flies have been around, right? Especially in our cities, thousands and thousands of flies and 100 years of battling flies. We have seen resistance in flies. Especially, let's say, in an agricultural setting. Let's say you have a dairy barn, you're using one product and you're treating for flies on a regular basis. What happens is you don't kill every fly every time you treat. You're left with a small subpopulation, which then expands again. If you do this over and over again, you actually select flies that have a genetic predisposition to combat these pesticides, to be resistant to it. And so resistance does develop. Okay, so dealing with resistance, there's some different things you can do. One, you can rotate the products that you're using. So that means different modes of action. So instead of using just a product that attacks the nervous system, you use multiple ones and you rotate through those. That will combat resistance. Second, if you use at the same time products that have more than one active ingredient, that have different modes of action, that will also combat resistance, and you won't have selection for one specific type of fly. And then third, if you kill everything in an area, so there's no population left, that breaks the cycle that causes resistance. So those three things are ways in which you can battle resistance, and a good program will use multiple means to do that. It also will move away from the pesticide itself and look for mechanical ways like closing the door to stop flies, because then resistance doesn't have any bearing whatsoever. So, of course, the best solution there is one that's not with pesticides.
Okay, yeah, so that relates to the last question. Which pesticide is the most effective?
Sure, and there's a lot out there, and every year they come up with new ones, and there's new and exciting pesticides that can be used against pests. But the reality is the best pesticide is no pesticide. And there's a place for pesticides. They can be used, and in certain moments they can be highly effective to quickly reduce or stop a problem. But we should always go beyond that, look for root causes, see if we can solve things without the use of a product, especially when it comes to spraying things on commercial structures or our homes. If we can solve these things without having to use that, then we're all better for it. And we don't have things like resistance. We just help things in general. So the solution around that's always going to be a non-pesticide solution.
Thank you, Douglas. We're going to make this recording available to watch on our website, where you can also find lots more information on large flies as well as other pests. So I'd just like to finish off today by thanking everyone for joining us on our webinar, Douglas for presenting, and take care and goodbye.